Hello. Thanks for joining us. I am here for a panel that I'm so incredibly excited about with two absolutely amazing individuals that I can think of nobody else better to have this conversation with. So we're going to be talking about machine learning and the creative future and what do we want to build towards. But we should introduce ourselves first. So I'm Mike Jungbluth, animation director at Compulsion Games. I've been working in games for about 17 years now and run a bunch of these conferences, organizations. So get a good sense of art and tech and craft and meet all these great people and get opportunities like this to talk to amazing folks like yourself. So Ahmed, if you want to kick us off and give yourself an intro.
Sure. Hello, my name is Ahmed Best. I am an actor, director, writer, producer, educator. I got my start in big movies with George Lucas doing Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. I played the first CGI character in film history, Jar Jar Binks. And that was pretty much where I began thinking about the future and thinking about design and computers and how performance and performance capture moves us into the future in our artistic world. Right now, I teach at the Stanford D School, and I teach at the USC School of Dramatic Arts, as well as a senior fellow at the USC School for Communications and Journalism.
Perfect. And Sebastian.
My name is Sebastian Starke. I did my PhD in computer science and artificial intelligence character animation at the University of Edinburgh. I worked at Electronic Arts before and did some research on various character control problems in like basketball and football, games like FIFA and so on. And mostly applying machine learning techniques like neural networks to these typical problems of how can we generate realistic animations from motion capture data, how can we make machines learn from the data rather than just playing back animations. And recently I joined Meta to work on controlling virtual avatars in the metaverse, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is great. So for context for the audience, animation is one of these instances of a craft yet that doesn't have a publicly available version like a Chat GPT or a Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or music. There's a lot of things that can be sort of AI generated right now that isn't available yet for animation. And by nature of interactive animation, tech and art and actors and animators and everyone are already, we have to work together to make anything actually happen. So we're sort of in this perfect little sweet spot of a moment to sort of be able to step back and say, this isn't here yet for everything we're doing. What do we want to build towards? What is the goal? What is the thing that we want to do with this thing, right? Because it can be a tool. It can be something that takes jobs. There's whatever, all the bad ways that can happen. What's the good one? So my first question is to both of you. What does, where do you want to see this go? So Ahmed, we'll start with you. What does your ideal future look like?
I think the ideal future for me is one where artificial intelligence starts making things possible that we didn't think were possible. And I'm much more of a person who believes in the hybridization of artificial intelligence and human interaction and not having one replace the other. I don't see one as better or worse, or I don't prefer one to another. I think that there are two, just like you have oil paintings and you have photography. Both can exist and you can see the beauty in both of them simultaneously without having to disparage one or the other. I think where we get into trouble is when we start talking about the fear and the scarcity of what artificial intelligence can do and how that could replace what human beings can do. And I think if we look at, what if we really embrace this idea that AI is not going to be stopped, right? It's definitely going to increase, and it's going to increase exponentially in the next few years. What is it like, and how does that enhance or increase our human experience rather than how can it replace us?
Yeah, I dig that. Sebastian, for you,
Yeah,
what is What are you looking for?
Yeah, maybe I can look at this more from like the machine learning, like technical perspective here. We always talk about these like short-term and long-term goals, and of course, in the short term, we think about how can we make like the workflows easier. Like this is something like we take a workflow and that exists already, and try to find the bottleneck in some workflow that takes like 80% of the time, and maybe just try to replace that bottleneck in our pipeline with a machine learning solution. But I think in the long term, there are much more exciting solutions, because anything that just like improves the workflow, I see as something incremental, because we're not like reformulating a problem to like solve something entirely new that we couldn't imagine before, like what Ahmed said before. So if we look at these, like what you mentioned, like in speech and in vision, you have these pre-trained models like BERT, and you have these VGG models that give you some features from like speech or these vision, like some pre-trained information, and you can train other models based on that to have a sort of warm start, so you don't need to like start everything from scratch. You don't have that in animation. That's where you're also coming from, I think, like where we have a unique opportunity to also build something where lots of different like paths can benefit from. And you know, when we just think about games, we always have this this mindset of we are controlling a character with a mouse, with a key, or with a joystick, and that's how we steer the character. And like the character is like the third person sort of that we are controlling as an observer. But this is not a natural interface to have like a keyboard and a mouse. And I think like more natural interfaces are things like, can I sketch something and the computer generates like an animation? Can I tell a sentence and the computer like makes the character walk to the kitchen and find a spoon somewhere? Can I, you know, just find more higher level natural instructions to achieve something that we want? And I think this is also very well aligned with this multimodality, like these breakthroughs in speech that we have nowadays. And I think this is sort of like what we should keep in mind when we are solving the short-term goals, that these are somehow aligned with what we want to achieve long-term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to jump on that a little bit, I think we're also talking about, when we're talking about interfaces, we're talking about BCIs, and when you're thinking about BCIs and machine learning, you have a whole, you know, you have millions of people who don't have the ability to speak or don't have the ability to move, who have debilitating diseases like ALS, and they want to be animators or they want to be artists, and with machine learning and artificial intelligence and BCIs, their thought processes can turn into these images and these animations that we might be able to see into the imagination of somebody who can't even move. And I think that's just a beautiful way we can experience each other.
I totally like what you just mentioned, because I always consider myself as a really bad artist, and I try to avoid like drawing things at all costs. And last year at GDC, there was a demo where we just like sketched a few lines on a piece of paper, like a children drawing, and then you scan this, upload with a mobile phone just to a computer, and the computer understands the structure of a character that you were drawing, like just a dog or whatever kind of human, and it animates, it creates a walking sequence for this. So it turns something, a few lines, into an animated character, which was amazing to me.
Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I love the idea of this allows for accessibility and people to create things that didn't have the skill set or the tools or ability previously, right? Where I kind of get in my head is, you know, there's the to do anything well, there's like the 10,000 hours, there are 10,000 drawings, and there's something in that learning process that, as a creative or becoming an expert in a creation of a process of a craft, you sort of have to make those mistakes and go through that thing to learn what is your intent, what is your own sort of vision and style, and what it is you want to say. And I think where I'm interested in, there's this bit where some of that can be gatekeeping. Some of that is unnecessary tedium, but who are the right people to define that, right? Because I think there are those moments where there's tedious work, but you can kind of get into a flow state. And you know, I think I can't remember who one said it, but you know, between the conscious and unconscious is when you have aha moments and creativity sort of comes about. And I think that tedium and flow state allows to balance in that in between space. So I guess, how do we define, like, where's the value in that? where is it? Where is it hindering? Where is it helping? Where are both your thoughts on that? Ahmed, if you want to go.
Sure. I think there will always be a flow state as long as we're human beings. I think that they'll change, they'll be different. I think we'll be putting those 10,000 hours into other things, right? Like, before Neolithic tools, we were putting 10,000 hours into like skinning animals. You know what I'm saying? Like we all figured out how to do that until there was, stone knives, and then, the Bronze Age, and then so forth, right? So I think as human beings, we always adapt to the ages. And what, because I'm an optimist, and, and as a, a futurist and Afrofuturist and someone who teaches futurism and design, what I really like to say is, the thing that is really going to drive everything that we do is who we are emotionally. And if we know who we are emotionally, it doesn't matter the tool that we use in order to express those emotions. We're really spending the 10,000 hours to practice the something so we can express ourselves, right? That's what we're doing, whether we learn an instrument or we learn how to draw or we learn how to code. What we want to do is we want to express ourselves. We want to tell the world who we are. And as long as we're looking for that, regardless of what the machine learning and what the AI is doing, the interface of the flow state to actual, making of the thing will always be about us and doing it for us.
I think creativity is a really interesting question in general in AI. Like many things in AI work to some extent because we can somehow, as humans, assign labels of what we want to describe. Like we can describe in images like there's this object, there's this animal, there's maybe this human. We can, and for animations, define like this character now does this kind of motion or does this motion. But these are like very like human created labels that afterwards somehow, of course, like give us control of what we observe in the data or what we want the model to extract from the data. On the other hand, it limits our creativity because the model only understands whatever we told the model. And that's sort of like a really tricky problem somehow in this approach. And then there are, of course, like these techniques that or like these approaches, or the dream that we don't need to assign these labels, don't need to author things, manually spend hours defining things, but we can sort of like learn underlying patterns structured in the data with some unsupervised techniques. And then the problem, of course, is like, I'm a big fan of this personally because it resolves the manual work and it learns some representations. The problem, of course, is that when we learn these representations are often, just some abstract feature spaces where we need to figure out how to control them. So we don't have necessarily control of what the model extracts as something like the style or the content in emotion or any kind of form of, data. And this is something that I think in the long term will be very valuable for us to work on, because in motion matching, this is a super standard technique, right, in games animation. But now we have more and more like data available, like from computer vision, where we capture like video to motion data, and motion capture techniques become more accessible. So we have a growing amount of data, and at some point, just the process of even going through the data is not really doable anymore because we have too much data. So we need some kind of techniques where we don't need to rely on manual work to author or to express our creativity in the data, but we can, after training or after finding the functions in data, like sort of play around with the distributions of the data.
Yeah. Because I know even with ChatGPT, right? It was, we're going to hire people for like under $1 a day to go through and label all that stuff, right? So it's like all of the same sort of things that we keep doing in business. And so I guess that's the thing where I'm interested in from, to me, there's the creativity side, and then there's the portion of like, so taste, right? A lot of creativity and a lot of art, the quality of it is variable based on the taste and intent of the person creating it, and then the people who are engaging with it, right? And so that's why somebody can be proud of something that nobody else likes, and it's okay because there's two inflection points, two points of intent that can happen. So I guess my interest to both of you is how are things being done in a way, or where can you see the opportunities for making sure that, again, we think about how we allow for creativity, allow for taste, try to raise up expectations, because I think a lot of times we hear, oh, that's good enough, ship it, get it out the door, it's fine,
Yeah.
nobody's going to care about that. And I think, you get a lot of things where a lot of mass media and public and is take a thing and then just adjust it a little bit and then push it out the door, and then adjust a little bit and push it out the door. And so my concern is the idea of not necessarily the AI singularity, but the AI surrender is what I've heard it coined, where if people have just been fine with good enough in their mass media, then are we allowing, when people have more access to these tools, how do we make sure that we're not just flooding a market with good enough and tedium? And again, is that a gatekeeping? Like, is that okay? How does things rise to the top? There's a bunch of babbling there for me, but I guess I'm interested in both your takes. Did any of that sort of spark anything in your heads?
I go first.
I mean, I think it's yes, and I think there is definitely a partially a gatekeeping situation that's going on. I mean, it's happening right now. You have very few companies kind of controlling which way this AI kind of generative data is aggregated and pushed out. So I think there definitely is a gatekeeping part of it, but there'll always be that person who gets through the gate and pushes through. There's always going to be somebody who is going to look at all the information and think about it in a different way and then blow the gates open. There's in every art form, there's, a Picasso or a Beyonce, you know what I'm saying? Like, somebody is going to come in and change it. So I think both will exist simultaneously. And then I think there's going to be an AI version of that, where the AI pushes it and pushes further and says, like, good enough isn't good enough. We can actually become this other.
Yeah, maybe I can continue with this good enough point. Another point, so I totally get, like, you want to, like, achieve some kind of state where things, of course, first of all, are good enough and, like, are, a starting point, and then we can, like, improve from there. But sometimes it's also, I feel, it's sometimes good to have many good enough solutions, because even if you have many things that are good enough, like you have different, characters that can walk good enough, not perfect, none of them, but maybe they all feel very different when you control them. So it looks maybe all of them good enough, but they feel very different when you're controlling them with different kind of, machine learning techniques or whatever kind of animation frameworks. Now, when you have comic characters, right? They look sometimes like very poorly maybe animated or something, but at the same time it looks good, or maybe it feels good because it's very responsive. It doesn't need to be realistic or natural. And on the other hand, when we have these realistic games, right, when like Electronic Arts or something publishes a new FIFA version, you expect like realism, you expect like highly detailed, agile movements that even resemble what the actual players are doing in the sports games or in the actual match. Now, this raises the bar of like what is good enough to a very different level, because our expectation lies somewhere totally different. So I think this good enough always goes along with what's the application, where's the sweet spot of what do we expect from the system to do, and how does it feel to us, and also how do we want to experience controlling or like playing around with the system that we are building. And you have these VR devices next to me here. When I'm, for example, want to control a character with this and I'm jumping, and the character doesn't jump when I'm jumping with these devices, it feels pretty bad because I feel not immersed at all anymore. But for example, when the character jumps and it doesn't maybe necessarily look very physically plausible, maybe there's not perfect gravity in the feet or something, but at least it follows my motion in some way. It doesn't need to look good, but it's good enough to feel immersed somehow. And that's a very interesting point to me always. Then you have maybe like 10 different demos, and one of them hits the sweet spot where you feel like this is the good enough demo that like is nice to me.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely triple down and agree with what Sebastian is saying, and just to add as an artist, and as a storyteller, I think story is key, and I think good enough is very relative and very subjective, right? Like if you look at manga versus Marvel, right? Marvel has those very like hyper realistic superhero style looking people with muscles are bulging out of their necks. And manga is just very symmetrical, very super simple, where like noses and mouths are lines, but you can feel the exact same thing from a manga superhero as you do from a Marvel superhero, because the story hits you right in that place where you believe it. So I think, you know, this idea of good enough is okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's really good as long as the story is there, as long as the content provides some sort of emotion for the people who are in the audience watching. Then, you know, I think you hit that sweet spot.
So there needs to be some part of the creation that elevates beyond, right? Like, so in your case, Ahmed, the story can't be good enough. If everything else is at a good enough level, there needs to be something to elevate beyond that, right?
Yeah, I think when we say good enough, I think we have to be specific about what we're talking about, because I think good enough is subjective, right? I've seen line drawings that brought me to tears, right? And it had no realistic visuals whatsoever, right? I think all it has to be is there has to be an emotional core to whatever you're doing that affects you. You know what I'm saying? When you're doing it, and how you make the art is very subjective, right? Like, when you make the art support the feeling that you want, not necessarily the aesthetic per se, you know, in a hierarchical way.
Maybe a good way to approach this, like how do we look at good enough, is you know, when you're measuring animation quality, or like when you're looking at how much cost can I save when generating animation, not necessarily we are always looking at how good does the motion look, but how much time can I save to achieve the same level of quality so I can create more content. So maybe, you know, good enough can also be something like we can create more content that is like equally satisfying, and we are accelerating the entire process to leave more creativity for other processes. And
yes,
yeah, and this is I think
hear
what also that could also apply here nicely somehow, where, you know, finding the right, you know, often have a problem machine learning, like we don't know the right cost function, we don't need to evaluate. So the better way to evaluate is how can we reproduce something that acts as a baseline and just achieve comparable results in less time.
Yeah, I think it. So we've got a couple minutes left before we wrap. I guess what would be, where would, say we're wanting to get to a point where we create a digital actor that allows anybody to essentially say, here's a digital actor, tell whatever story you want with it. And they can interact with each other. And so it literally is at a point where somebody can create their own story with their own digital characters and have removed the need for anyone else to sort of create that for them, or specifically make that. What would be, like, what are your thoughts on that? And where would you want to be, like, as an actor, I need to be involved at this point. And my expectations would be that when this is available, what does that mean for me in my craft moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is the stuff that I was facing a lot when, you know, Phantom Menace came out. Like, the big fear was, are these digital actors going to replace real actors, you know? And that was part of the pushback against Phantom Menace, that there were all of these digital elements in there that weren't actual human beings, and people really resisted that. Now, because it's been around for 30 years, people just kind of accept this idea that there will be digital actors and digital main characters and CGI and things, so it's not as daunting. But with AI, machine learning, and animation, there will be another scare of, not only are they not going to need actors, but they're not going to need people now, or animators, right? I think we're a ways away from that, although not too far, because number one, acting is very hard. A lot of people think that they can do it, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are kind of mediocre at it who are doing very well. But to be honest, like, being an actor is not an easy job. It's very difficult to be believable in a story. And so, what we really need to be focusing on is how you can make digital actors emotional and believable in order to be able to put them in a story in which we can experience that same kind of emotion. Like, and that's not in like a video game format. Like when you're playing a video game, it's understood that these characters like don't move their faces, right? Or they don't emote in a certain way. We can't buy that. But if we're passively watching something and we're expecting these digital characters to be Meryl Streep, then we're going to have to make sure that they know how to do that. And we're probably not too far away from that, but it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of data, and it's going to take a lot of input from actors, right? And I also think it's going to, my partner in my futurist company, the Algorithm Futures Group, Dr. Lonnie Brooks always says the real AI is ancestral intelligence. And we're going to really have to dive into the ancestral intelligence of all of our stories globally in order to have a big enough data set to have these stories be believable. And I think the beautiful thing about what's happening right now, especially with digital storytelling, machine learning, and AI, is it opens up this opportunity for global stories to be heard and experienced. And if the gatekeepers keep the pipeline small, then we're doing ourselves a disservice as people who are in this world who love these kinds of stories. So my hope is to actually see actors really contributing to the data sets of these things and being paid for it, being compensated for it properly. And then ancestral intelligence being added to the data set so we know our history of the past so we can imagine and create towards a future.
Yeah, I love that.
Pretty much agree.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, Sebastian, last thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, I'm going to make it very short. I agree with everything what was said here. I just want to add one single point. What is always exciting to me about this, what we just talked about, is how, for example, a novice user who doesn't know how to dance really, or doesn't know how to sword fight, or doesn't know how to perform like complex, martial arts movements, how we can upscale, detail movements from a low-dimensional user input that is just like an estimate of a user wants to do, but make it look much better in in a virtual world, just to make the person feel like he's actually that actor in the world, and to learn from data again to map just rough estimate low-dimensional movements to high fidelity, more believable movements. So the immersion is again given. It's very interesting there.
Yeah. I feel like I can
just
about this
really. Can I just say really quick? We lost a wonderful actor this month named Lance Reddick, and Lance Reddick was a wonderful character actor. But he's one of those guys that you see and stuff, and you go, "Oh man, I love that guy and everything." He was in John Wick. He plays the front, the guy at the front door at the hotel in John Wick, right? And Lance was a huge video game guy. He was really into playing these games, and he voice acted a bunch of games. And I just read that he was playing he was playing a game, I can't remember the name of the game, before he passed, the day before he passed. And in the game online right now, they're holding memorials and vigils in the game for Lance Reddick. And all of these people all around the world in their video game forms are honoring Lance Reddick, the human being, the person, in avatar and digital costume, right? Mm-hmm. That's something pretty special. It's really, really special.
Incredible, yeah.
And when we talk about these things, we can talk about how emotional they can be and the things that we can do and how we can bring people together through it. So there is definitely a positive, optimistic way we can look at these things. And we don't necessarily have to always go to, they're going to take over and turn us all into batteries, right? There's some really wonderful experiences we can have in this world.
Agreed. That's great. That was perfect. Perfect way to wrap it. Well, appreciate it, guys. Sorry about that. This is great. Sorry for the tech difficulties. I literally could chat this all day with you two, I think, and hope to continue these discussions. And yeah, this was awesome. So everyone else enjoy the stream. We'll get that up soon. Otherwise, chill later.